Chapter 1: The Locked Door. The Woodlock family, seeking a fresh start, had moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of a sleepy town. The house, with its gabled roof and ivy-covered walls, exuded a charm that belied its age. But beneath its quaint exterior, a shadow lurked, hidden in the depths of its forgotten basement. On their first day, while exploring their new home, they stumbled upon a locked door in the floor of the pantry, covered in dust and cobwebs. It was a curious anomaly in the otherwise well-maintained house. The real estate agent had made no mention of a basement. "Maybe it's just an old storage space," suggested Mark Woodlock, trying to sound nonchalant, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. His wife, Sarah, shared his curiosity but felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine as she gazed at the door. Their two children, Lily and Noah, clung to each other, sensing the adult's apprehension. Despite their reservations, the allure of uncovering the house's secrets proved too strong. Mark fetched tools from the moving boxes and set to work on the rusty padlock. With a final, forceful twist, the lock snapped open, releasing a gust of stale, musty air. The family peered into the darkness below, the stairs descending into an impenetrable black. Armed with flashlights, they descended cautiously. The air grew colder with each step, a stark contrast to the warm summer day above. As they reached the bottom, their lights revealed a room perfectly preserved from another era, the 1800s by the look of it. The room was a time capsule, filled with antique furniture, oil paintings, and a grand piano in the corner. A thick layer of dust covered everything, untouched by time. The atmosphere was heavy, the silence broken only by their soft footsteps and the distant sound of a clock ticking. As they explored, Mark found a journal on a desk, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, revealing neat, cursive writing. The entries spoke of daily life in a bygone era, but as he flipped through the pages, the tone shifted to one of fear and despair. "We should leave this place," Sarah whispered, a sense of dread washing over her. But it was too late. As they turned to leave, the door above slammed shut with a resounding thud, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they rushed to the stairs, only to find the door locked from the outside. Trapped in the forgotten basement, the family huddled together, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room, once a curious discovery, now felt like a tomb, suffocating and oppressive. As the hours passed, strange occurrences began to unfold. The piano played a few notes on its own, a melancholic melody that echoed in the stillness. The oil paintings seemed to watch them, their subjects' eyes following their every move. Whispers filled the room, voices from another time, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Shadows moved just beyond the reach of their light, and the temperature dropped, an unnatural chill enveloping them. In the forgotten basement, the Woodlock family faced the realization that they were not alone. Something else was there with them, a presence from the past, trapped in time and desperate to be heard. The night was long, and the darkness deep, as they awaited their fate in the heart of the house's dark secret. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The Woodlock family, enveloped in the suffocating darkness of the basement, clung to each other, their fear palpable. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, a sense that they were not merely trapped within these walls but had intruded upon something ancient and malevolent. Sarah's breaths came in short, panicked gasps as she tried the door again, her efforts futile against the immovable barrier. Mark's attempts to reassure his family were drowned out by the ominous whispers that filled the room, voices from an unseen chorus that seemed to mock their plight. Lily, her young eyes wide with terror, clung to her brother. "I hear them talking," she whispered, her voice trembling. They're saying things I don't understand. Noah, trying to be brave, wrapped his arms around his sister. It's just the wind, he lied, his own heart racing. The piano's melancholy notes grew louder, a discordant symphony that seemed to resonate with the room's hidden secrets. The portraits on the walls, relics of a forgotten time, seemed to come alive in the flickering flashlight beams, their painted eyes following the family's every move. In the dim light, the journal on the desk caught Mark's attention again. He picked it up, leafing through the pages in search of answers. The entries spoke of a family not unlike their own, who had once lived in the house. But as he read further, the words twisted into accounts of strange occurrences, unexplained illnesses, and a growing sense of paranoia. It's like history repeating itself, Mark murmured, a chill running down his spine. As the hours ticked by, the room seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering secrets of the past. The air grew colder, a frigid embrace that seemed to drain their warmth. Then, amidst the eerie calm, a new sound emerged, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from the far corner of the room. It was slow and deliberate, like the beating of a heart. The family froze, their eyes fixed on the shadowy corner where an old, dust-covered trunk sat. With trepidation, Mark approached the trunk, the thumping growing louder with each step. He reached out, his hand shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside, he found nothing but old clothes and trinkets, relics of a bygone era. But as he sifted through them, his hand brushed against something hard and cold, a small, intricately carved box. The moment he touched it, the thumping stopped, and the room fell into an oppressive silence. He opened the box to reveal a locket, its silver surface tarnished with age. Inside was the portrait of a woman, her eyes filled with an unspoken sorrow. As he examined the locket, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. Darkness enveloped them, a tangible entity that seemed to breathe and move. In the pitch black, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices that spoke of tragedy and loss. The portraits on the walls seemed to come alive, their whispers merging into a single, mournful wail. The family huddled together, lost in the darkness, as the house revealed its haunted past. They were not just trapped in a basement, they were prisoners of a ghostly echo, a remnant of a forgotten tragedy that refused to be silenced. In the forgotten basement, time stood still, and the Woodlock family faced the terrifying reality that they might never escape the grasp of the house's dark heart. Chapter 3: The Haunting Melody. In the oppressive blackness of the basement, the Woodlock's fear was a living thing, writhing in the pit of their stomachs. The extinguishing of the light seemed to have emboldened the spirits, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if clamoring to be heard. Mark clutched the locket tightly, a lifeline in the sea of darkness. The temperature in the room had plummeted, their breaths visible in the icy air. Sarah tried to relight the flashlights, but they remained stubbornly dead, as if drained by the malevolence that enveloped them. The haunting melody of the piano started again, each note echoing through the room like a lament. The sound was hypnotic, pulling at the fringes of their sanity. In the darkness, the melody seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a spectral serenade that resonated with the room's tragic history. Lily, her eyes wide with terror, whispered, "They're getting closer." The whispers had taken on a rhythmic quality, synchronizing with the piano's eerie tune, a chorus of the damned. Without warning, the room was bathed in a faint, ghostly light, emanating from the old chandelier overhead. The dim light cast grotesque shadows on the walls, the portraits now appearing to be in silent screams. In the center of the room, the shadows coalesced into a more solid form. It was a figure, ethereal and translucent, its features blurred but unmistakably human. The figure moved gracefully, as if dancing to the piano's tune, its movements fluid and sorrowful. The family watched in frozen horror as other figures emerged from the shadows, joining the first in the macabre dance. They were dressed in garments from the 1800s, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and despair. Sarah clutched her children close, her voice barely a whisper. "What do they want from us?" Mark, his gaze fixed on the ghostly dancers, replied, "I don't know, but it has something to do with this locket." As he spoke, the figure in the center of the dance turned to face them. Its eyes, dark voids in the dim light, seemed to bore into their souls. The room grew colder still, the air thick with unspoken anguish. The dancing figures began to circle the family, their movements becoming more frenzied, the piano's melody increasing in tempo. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a supernatural energy that seemed to emanate from the figures themselves. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the figures vanished, leaving the family alone in the eerie half-light. The sudden silence was deafening, the absence of the melody in whispers more terrifying than their presence. In the stillness, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs leading to the pantry. Heavy, deliberate steps, descending into the basement. The family turned toward the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. As the footsteps grew closer, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, his features obscured by the shadows, but his presence was commanding, radiating an aura of power and anger. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his gaze fixed on the locket in Mark's hand. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and resonant, filled with a rage that echoed through the centuries. "You have awakened them," he said, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You have disturbed the rest of the damned." In the forgotten basement, the Woodlock family faced a new terror, a presence from the past that held the key to their imprisonment. The haunting melody had been just the beginning of their nightmare. Chapter 4: The Guardian of Grief. The figure at the foot of the stairs emanated an aura of brooding menace. His clothes were of another era, tattered yet somehow regal. His eyes, dark pits of sorrow and rage, seemed to pierce through the very souls of the Woodlock family. "I am Edward," his voice boomed in the confined space, "guardian of this place, keeper of its secrets and its sorrow." The air in the room felt thick, charged with a palpable sense of dread. Edward's gaze remained fixated on the locket in Mark's hand. "That locket," he continued, his voice a low growl, "belongs to her, the one whose spirit you have disturbed with your presence." Mark, his hand trembling, held out the locket. "We didn't know. We just found it," his voice trailed off under Edward's intense gaze. "The locket belongs to Eleanor," Edward said, his tone softening slightly. "She was the lady of this house, trapped in time by a tragedy too great to bear." The room seemed to respond to Edward's words, the walls whispering echoes of a long-forgotten past. The ghostly light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along with the unspoken tale. "Eleanor's spirit is restless, bound to this place by her unspeakable grief," Edward continued. "When you opened the door to this room, you awakened her memories, her pain." Sarah clutched her children closer, her voice barely a whisper. "What happened to her?" Edward's face, illuminated by the ghostly light, seemed to contort with the weight of the story. A tale of love and loss, of a heart broken by betrayal and a life taken too soon. As he spoke, the room transformed. The walls faded away, revealing scenes from the past like ghostly vignettes. They saw a younger Eleanor, radiant and full of life, her laughter filling the room. Then came scenes of sorrow, a betrayal, a lover's deceit, a descent into madness, and finally, her tragic end. The family watched, transfixed by the haunting reenactment, their hearts heavy with the sorrow of Eleanor's tale. The room pulsed with her grief, the air thick with the echoes of her despair. The visions faded, and the room returned to its forlorn state. Edward's gaze was now on the children, his eyes softening. The innocence of youth, yet untouched by the shadows of the world. He turned back to Mark and Sarah. You must help her find peace, release her from the bonds of her grief. Only then will the door open, and you be free from this place. But how? Mark asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Edward pointed to the piano. The melody, it was her favorite. Play it, and you may reach her, soothe her tormented soul. The task seemed impossible, but Mark knew they had no choice. He approached the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. The melody was etched in their minds, a haunting tune that spoke of loss and longing. As he began to play, the room seemed to breathe, the air vibrating with anticipation. The notes were clumsy at first, but then they found their rhythm, weaving a spell in the gloom of the basement. And then she appeared. Eleanor, a spectral vision of beauty and sorrow, her eyes brimming with tears. She floated toward the piano, her movements ethereal, drawn to the melody that was once her solace. In the forgotten basement, a bridge was formed between the living and the dead, a chance to heal a wound that time had failed to close. The Woodlock family, bound together in their fear, now faced the task of mending a broken spirit, their freedom hanging in the balance. Chapter 5 Melody of the Damned. As Mark played, the ghostly form of Eleanor drifted closer, her eyes locked on the locket that lay open on the piano. The melody filled the room, a haunting lullaby that seemed to transcend time, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. Eleanor's presence filled the basement with a palpable sadness. Her face, though spectral and blurred, was marked by the deep scars of betrayal and tragedy. The air grew colder, the breath of the family visible in the icy atmosphere. Sarah, holding Lily and Noah close, watched in a mix of fear and fascination. The children's eyes were wide, a mix of innocence and terror at the sight of the ghostly apparition. The room itself reacted to Eleanor's presence. The walls seemed to weep, the portraits' expressions turning mournful, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. The shadows danced more frenetically, as if agitated by the unearthly reunion. Eleanor reached out a translucent hand towards the locket, her fingers passing through it, yet somehow causing the silver to glow softly. Her lips moved, a silent plea, a voice lost in the void. Edward, the guardian, stood silently by, his eyes reflecting the turmoil of the scene. Her heart remains broken, he intoned solemnly. Her spirit bound to the sorrow that consumed her. Mark stopped playing, the final note hanging in the air, a lingering echo of despair. "How can we help her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Edward's gaze turned to the children. "Innocence, it has a power, a purity that can heal the deepest wounds." Sarah's protective instinct surged. "What do you mean? What do you want from them?" Edward shook his head slowly. "Not harm, but hope. The innocence of a child can remind a tormented soul of the light, of the joy that once was." Lily, her voice small but clear, spoke up. "We can help her, Mommy. We can show her that not everything is sad." The simplicity of her words seemed to resonate in the room, a counterpoint to the overwhelming grief. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lily, a glimmer of curiosity in her hollow eyes. Encouraged, Lily stepped forward, her hand in Noah's. "Do you want to play with us?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the gloomy basement. Eleanor's form flickered. her expression one of confusion and longing. For a moment, it seemed as if the years of sorrow were lifting, a faint light glowing within her spectral form. But then the room darkened. The shadows grew more aggressive, swirling around the family with renewed intensity. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the corners, a sound that spoke of anger and resentment. Edward's expression turned grave. "There are others here, spirits not as benign as Eleanor. Your presence has awakened them, and they are not pleased." The air grew thick with hostility, the whispers turning into snarls. Dark figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms twisted and malevolent, eyes glowing with a hateful fire. The family huddled together, facing the growing menace. The basement had become a battleground, a clash between the innocence of the living and the festering rage of the damned. In the heart of the forgotten basement, a struggle unfolded, a fight for a soul's salvation against the vengeful spirits that sought to keep it in chains. The Woodlocks, caught in the crossfire, faced a terror that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 6: The Spirit's Fury. The basement, once a silent tomb of forgotten memories, now thrummed with malevolent energy. The shadows cast by the faint, ghostly light twisted into grotesque shapes, forming faces contorted in anger and pain. The malevolent spirits that Edward had warned of were now manifest, their presence a tangible force of hostility and resentment. Mark, Sarah, Lily, and Noah huddled together, their fear a palpable entity in the midst of the spectral storm. The air crackled with the fury of the spirits, the temperature plummeting as their rage manifested in a physical chill. Eleanor's spirit, caught between the innocence offered by the children and the vengeful entities surrounding them, flickered erratically, her form becoming more transparent, more desperate. Edward, the guardian, stood as a barrier between the family and the advancing spirits. These souls were wronged, their deaths untimely and filled with bitterness, he explained, his voice a steady beacon in the chaos. They cannot see beyond their own anguish. The spirits advanced, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. Their eyes, empty voids, seemed to suck the light from the room, deepening the shadows. Lily, her small voice trembling but resolute, called out, "Please, we want to help. We don't want to hurt anyone." For a moment, the spirits paused, their advance halted by the purity in Lily's voice. But the moment was fleeting, their hatred too deep-seated, reigniting their fury. The basement shuddered as if in response to the spirits' wrath. Objects began to levitate, books flew off shelves, the piano lid slammed open and shut, and the chandelier swayed dangerously. Sarah clutched her children tighter, fear etched on her face. "What do we do?" she cried out to Edward. The guardian's eyes were grim. "Their pain is too great, they seek only to share it. Your only chance is to appease them, to acknowledge their suffering." Mark, driven by a desperate need to protect his family, stepped forward. "We hear you," he shouted above the din, "we recognize your pain, your anger. You are not forgotten." The spirits hesitated, their forms wavering. The air was filled with their whispers, a cacophony of grief and despair. The room seemed to pulse with their anguish, the walls echoing their cries. Eleanor's spirit, bolstered by the family's efforts, began to glow brighter, her form gaining solidity. She moved toward the spirits, her arms outstretched in a gesture of peace and empathy. The spirits recoiled at first, but Eleanor persisted, her light growing stronger. A calm began to settle over the room, the tumultuous energy dissipating as Eleanor's light enveloped the spirits. Slowly, the spirits' forms began to soften, their malevolence fading. The shadows retreated, the objects in the room gently settling back into place. The temperature in the room rose, the icy grip of the spirit's anger melting away. In the newfound calm, Eleanor's spirit turned to the family, her expression one of gratitude and sorrow. The locket, still glowing softly on the piano, seemed to pulsate in time with her ethereal heart. In the heart of the forgotten basement, a moment of peace was achieved, a brief respite in the battle between light and darkness. But the struggle was far from over, the balance between the living and the dead a fragile accord that could shatter at any moment. Chapter 7 The Unraveling Veil. The temporary calm in the basement was like the eye of a storm, a deceptive lull in an ongoing battle. The Woodlock family, surrounded by the quieted spirits, felt a temporary relief, but the air was still charged with an undercurrent of unresolved anguish. Eleanor's spirit, now more defined in the dim light, seemed to be struggling with an internal conflict. Her gaze was fixed on the locket, a symbol of her lost love and life. The locket's glow had intensified, casting a soft radiance in the gloomy room. Edward, his face etched with centuries of sorrow, spoke softly, "The locket is the key. It holds her heart, her memories. To free her, and yourselves, it must be reconciled with her spirit." Mark, holding the locket, felt its energy pulsating, as if it were a living heart. "How do we reconcile it?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Edward's eyes, filled with the wisdom of ages, met Mark's. "It must be returned to its rightful place, to the heart of her tragedy. Only then can her spirit find peace." The task seemed insurmountable in the oppressive atmosphere of the basement. The shadows, though subdued, still lingered at the edges of the room, a silent audience to the unfolding drama. As if sensing their intent, the basement began to resist. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier, thicker. The portraits on the walls, their expressions twisted in pain, began to weep black tears, the sorrow of the house manifesting in a physical form. The piano started to play on its own, a discordant melody that set their nerves on edge. The chandelier above swayed more violently, its crystals clinking like the chattering of teeth. Sarah, her protective instincts in overdrive, whispered, "We need to be quick. This place, it's unraveling." Lily and Noah, their faces pale in the ghostly light, nodded in silent agreement. The innocence they had offered was a beacon in the darkness, but it was also a fragile shield against the overwhelming despair of the spirits. Mark approached Eleanor's spirit, the locket extended in his trembling hand. "Eleanor, we want to help you find peace," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. Eleanor's eyes, deep pools of sorrow, met his. She reached out, her hand passing through Mark's but somehow connecting with the locket. The room trembled, a low rumble that seemed to come from the very foundations of the house. The spirits around them stirred, their forms becoming agitated. Whispers turned into moans, the air vibrating with the intensity of their emotions. Eleanor's spirit began to glow brighter, the light emanating from her enveloping the locket. The room reacted violently, the walls shaking, books tumbling from shelves, the piano keys clacking wildly. In the chaos, the family stood together, united in their resolve to end the cycle of sorrow. Eleanor's light grew blinding, a beacon in the darkness, pushing back against the oppressive energy of the house. As the light reached its zenith, a scream pierced the air, a sound of pain, loss, and liberation. The basement convulsed, the fabric of reality itself seeming to tear, the veil between the living and the dead thinning to its breaking point. In the heart of the forgotten basement, a final stand was made, a battle against the shadows of the past. The Woodlock family, amidst the chaos, clung to each other, their fate intertwined with that of a spirit lost in time. Chapter 8, The Eternal Lament. The final chapter. The scream that had torn through the basement faded into a haunting echo, reverberating off the walls and seeping into the very soul of the house. Eleanor's light, once a beacon of hope, now waned, her form flickering as if struggling to maintain its presence. The Woodlock family, amidst the chaos, watched in horror as the basement began to unravel. The walls cracked, the ancient wood groaning under the strain of the supernatural forces at play. The portraits melted, their faces distorting into visages of agony, their black tears pooling on the floor. The locket in Mark's hand pulsed with a life of its own, its glow dimming with Eleanor's fading light. Edward, the guardian, his face a mask of sorrow, spoke one last time. Her spirit is too entwined with the house. It resists her release. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The liberation of Eleanor's spirit was not just a matter of soothing her pain. It was a battle against the very essence of the house, a structure built upon layers of tragedy and sorrow. As Eleanor's form became more translucent, the spirits around them grew more frenzied. The room shook violently, the air filled with the sounds of the house's anguish. The basement, a prison of grief, was collapsing under the weight of its own history. Sarah, holding her children tightly, shouted over the din, "We can't stay here. We have to get out." But the door to the pantry remained firmly shut, the path to escape as elusive as the peace they sought to bring to Eleanor. The piano's discordant melody reached a fever pitch, the keys moving frenetically. The chandelier above them shattered, raining down crystals like tears from the heavens. In a final act of desperation, Mark lunged toward the piano, slamming the lid shut. The impact dislodged the locket from his hand, sending it skittering across the floor. As the locket came to rest, the basement stilled momentarily, a suffocating calm before the final onslaught. Then, with a sound like the earth itself splitting, the floor beneath them cracked open, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. From this abyss, a torrent of spirits surged forth, their cries a cacophony of despair. The family was caught in a whirlwind of spectral energy, the air thick with the essence of the damned. Eleanor's spirit, now barely visible, hovered above the chaos, her lament a piercing wail that cut through the turmoil. Her light flickered and then extinguished, swallowed by the darkness of the abyss. The Woodlocks, unable to withstand the onslaught, fell to their knees, their screams lost in the roar of the vengeful spirits. The house, a living monument to sorrow, claimed them, its walls closing in, sealing their fate. As the basement collapsed around them, the world above remained oblivious to the tragedy unfolding beneath. The house stood silent, its secrets buried in the ruins of the forgotten basement. And in the darkness, the locket lay untouched, its glow extinguished. But within its silver frame, the portrait of Eleanor wept black tears, her sorrow now an eternal part of the house's legacy. The whispering woods, indifferent to the passing of time, continued to stand. And within its heart, the Woodlock family's tale was woven into the tapestry of its history, a haunting reminder of the house's unending lament. We hope you enjoyed the story of the Echo game. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.